we will be showing you how to do regular croissants and pain au chocolat. It comes from the same dough, same simple process.
Hi everybody, welcome to our video. I'm very excited today. I have with me Chef Bryn. She's an excellent bread chef, Viennoiseries. She actually taught me a lot and I want her to share a couple recipes with you. We'll be making today some croissant and some pain au chocolat. Thank you. Go ahead.
So as Chef said, we will be going over how to do croissants and pain au chocolat. First, I would like to talk about the ingredients we will be using. Croissants have flour, milk, water, instant yeast, salt, butter, and sugar. Now this does not include the butter that we will be rolling into the croissant dough. The essence of croissants is that they are a laminated dough, meaning we will be folding butter into the dough and making layers of dough, butter, dough. This is what gives us our classic flaky, crispy croissant. So I have all of my ingredients laid out here. Our flour is regular all-purpose flour. Our milk and our water are cold. Salt, butter, all we need to know about the salt is that it can be easily dissolvable, sea salt, table salt, kosher, as long as it will dissolve in your dough. A little bit of butter to go in the dough because there's already not enough butter in croissants, and some sugar. I will be mixing all of these ingredients together, but the special thing is I will be holding the sugar back for a little bit. Sugar is hygroscopic, meaning it pulls water towards it. Yeast needs water to work. This is a high amount of sugar, and if we mix them all together right in the beginning, the yeast would have to fight the sugar for the water. We are going to give that yeast a head start by mixing everything but the sugar. I am going to be using just a regular paddle. Croissants do not need the same development as regular dough. Paddles work very, very well for this. We are pretty much just stirring our ingredients together. So I have my flour, my salt. Now there is this myth that yeast and salt cannot touch. That is because salt is also hygroscopic and people are afraid that the salt will harm the yeast. This is not true in such small amounts. Just a little bit of salt and just a little bit of yeast together for the amount of time it's going to take you before you mix it is not going to hurt anything. You will still find people who will swear up and down that they can't touch. That's a myth. I have my water, again cold, straight out of the tap, and I have my milk, cold, whole milk. You can use skim or other things, but really there's no need to. I have all of my ingredients in my bowl except for my sugar. I'm going to put the mixer on first speed or stir. I am simply combining these ingredients. I don't need to do anything special. I don't need any development. I just need my sugar. I just need my ingredients to be incorporated. Of course, with a mixer, things tend to always gather around the hook a little bit. You want to make sure that you are getting all of your flour and everything incorporated. So when I can't see any dry flour, when I don't have any lumps of anything, everything is evenly dispersed, I can go ahead and add my sugar. This has given our yeast enough of a chance to soak up some of that water and get working. Again, I'm just going to put it on stir. I just need this sugar to incorporate into the dough. I just want to wait until it doesn't feel grainy any longer. There are two stages of mixing dough. One is incorporation and the second stage is development. Incorporation is exactly what it sounds like. It is stirring all of our ingredients together. And development is where we will be looking for our dough to build structure. Structure is very important in dough because that is what holds it together and gives it its rise and gives us our interior of the dough. So here I have all of my ingredients incorporated. It doesn't feel grainy, everything is evenly dispersed. I want to develop this dough as I would with any other bread, but I do not want to develop it very much. Most bread needs a structure that can hold all of the ingredients and give you the nice open interior. But with croissants, we will be folding the dough with the butter. This folding will build structure of the gluten, and if I build all of my structure right now, the dough and I will fight later on when I want to stretch it out and the glutens are already too developed. I can go ahead and stir it a little bit quicker to develop those glutens. In a bakery, this is called speed 2, development stage. As I said, development is lining up those glutens and it's going to give you your structure of your bread. If you think of Wonder Bread, it's very tight. There's no openness. That is a tight gluten structure. With the type of bread we make, we are never looking for that tight of a structure, and croissants are looking for even less of that texture. Again, we will be folding this dough when we laminate the butter into it, and that will build the strength that we ultimately need. Although, like I said, we do need some strength in our croissants because we need to have something to hold the butter. If you really underdevelop this dough, you are actually going to have the problem that it doesn't hold the butter. So our dough looks a little bit smoother, a little bit shinier, a little bit more together. It's starting to have a tug. I'm just going to quickly develop a little bit more gluten. I can already see how it is coming together and rounding up very nicely. This is exactly what I want. I want it smoother, but not so smooth that it's too strong. I have more of a tug now. Just that little bit of kneading developed it almost to where I want it. When you are doing speed 2 in a mixer, your mixer is imitating this motion. You are folding your dough and your glutens are getting a chance to line up. That is what gives us that structure. I now have something that will be strong enough to hold my butter, yet weak enough that I will be able to build structure by folding it later on. Now, croissants are a very lengthy process, and what I need to do with this dough now is I need to let it ferment. It needs a fermentation time so that it gets lighter and fluffier. It needs to build up some gas bubbles, and it needs to build up some flavor. Dough gets flavor from yeast interacting with the flour. It's building carbon dioxide and alcohol, and that alcohol is the yeast pulling flavor from the actual flour. So we want this to have a chance to develop some of that flavor on its own, and we need to do that by letting it sit. So we have now mixed our dough. We are letting it ferment where it is building gas bubbles and flavor. The next thing we are going to do after we let it ferment is we are going to square it off. We need to be able to roll butter into that dough. it is very difficult to roll rectangular butter into a circular piece of dough. So after it has fermented, we will square it off, and then we need to put it in the freezer. We need that dough to become the consistency of the butter that we will be rolling into it. If the dough and the butter are not the same consistency, about the same temperature, then the dough or the butter will roll without the other. We are looking for something where the butter and the dough will roll evenly together so that you always get full layers of dough, butter, dough. So this dough has a little bit of time before we can work with it. I am going to set it aside and let it ferment, and in the meantime, I have another piece of dough ready. This dough has been fermented, squared off, and frozen, or brought to about 68 degrees. If I am ever unsure, I can always take the temperature just by sliding a thermometer into the side of it. Now, because this is laminated and I will be folding butter into this dough, I need to get that butter and soften it. The way you handle your butter is incredibly important. The butter needs to be cold and soft. It needs to be pliable. As I said, it needs to be about the same consistency as the dough. You can tell your butter is soft enough when you can stick your finger into it and it leaves an imprint. There we go. I can put my finger into it and leave an imprint. I'm just going to double check my dough, and it is at 40 degrees. I said we're aiming for below 60, about 58. Even though this is colder than that, I am okay to work with it because it is pliable. I am going to want to place my butter right in the middle of this and fold my dough evenly over it. That will be my lock-in. And again, that will be ensuring that there are even layers of dough and butter. In order to do that, I need to get my butter into a rectangle. This is called training your butter, and it is simply cutting, dividing, flattening, training it to fit in where you want it to go. Now, some people have asked why you cannot melt the butter and spread it on to the croissant dough, building your layers that way. The reason is because when this dough rises, part of what creates those little pockets in the middle, those nice flaky layers, the holes in between the layers, is because of the moisture in the butter melting and creating a little moisture pocket that causes the dough to poof up. I want my butter just a little bit wider. My dough is a little bit longer. I can also finesse the dough a little bit by bringing it together. The name of the game for this part of croissants is evenness. I need my dough and my butter to be even pliability, and I need my dough and my butter to be as even of a layer as I possibly can. I do not want my dough to be dippy because this will mean it is uneven thicknesses, and later on you will have an area with too much dough and not enough butter. So I have my butter in the middle of my dough, and I can fold my dough evenly over my butter. You can see that my butter is going straight to the edge on both sides. You can see that there are no gaps in between the dough and the butter, and my dough meets perfectly in the middle. Now sometimes, because we are human and we are not perfect, you need to squeeze the edges a little bit together to fully cover on the top of your dough. This is okay. Again, I'm putting down a little bit of flour because I don't want my dough to stick to the table. You can tell both of them are pliable and they will roll together. My next step here, this was my lock-in, and my next step is to actually do a fold. This will be the essence of the lamination. In order to do that fold, I need to roll my dough out to the desired thickness. This will always depend on how large of a batch of dough you have. Because we want things even, I always start rolling from the middle and roll up. Another thing that may help you roll evenly is to flip sides. Again, I want nice square corners, so I'm going to work on that. As I said, you want things to go evenly, and some of my dough slid without my butter, and this is why I like to flip it over, because I can now roll those back together. Again, in the name of evenness, I want to roll to my edges. I want my edges as thick as all of the rest of my dough, but I do not want to roll my rolling pin off the dough. This causes a sharp edge, which is skinnier than all the rest of the dough. There's a fine line of rolling your edges evenly. I am not worried about the width at this point. As I do my folding and rolling up, my width will get to what I want. We are now going to do our first fold. It follows right on the heels of the lock-in, which is folding the butter into the dough. Our first fold is called a book fold or a double fold. We will essentially be folding the layers on top of themselves twice. It looks like a book when you are finished with it, hence it is called a book fold. I'm going to fold my bottom edge up a couple of inches. I do not want to fold it to the middle. This will cause a gap when you do the second part of the fold, and you will end up with a place that does not have butter or dough. So I'm going to fold that up just a little bit. I am going to fold my top down to meet it. Again, if my corners are not perfect, I can tug them or finesse them a little bit and get them to meet. I now have part of my book built. I have these layers here, but I said it was going to be a double fold, so I need to fold it once more. I am going to take the top and fold all the way over itself. That is the second fold in the double fold. Here, I now have something that looks like a book. I want to let my glutens relax a little bit for a while. As we saw with the mixing, we didn't want to develop the gluten very much because we wanted to let the dough let us roll out and that the glutens wouldn't be too strong. Because we have folded the dough, we have built strength, and those glutens are tight and they will be resistant to being worked with again. As you can see, we are going to have a second fold, so we need to let this rest. The dough should rest in the refrigerator for about 15 to 30 minutes. Please cover it when you put it in there so it does not dry out. If your dough is very, very warm, or you are working in a very warm kitchen, you can place your dough in the freezer for a little bit of time. But you want to be very, very careful because your butter can actually freeze in the freezer and the dough will stay soft so that when you go to roll it out, that frozen butter will not roll evenly. I want to talk a little bit about the history of croissants. A lot of people will tell you that Marie Antoinette brought them over to France, and that is how they became popular. For some reason, people are obsessed with crediting all food to Marie Antoinette, and this is simply not true. Finding the history of croissants is a little difficult. There are two versions of how they came into existence. The boring version of it is that in the 1800s, a French cafe started making croissants and it caught on. The reason why they say the 1800s is because that is when most of the recipes start appearing in books. The fun version is that in 1638, when Austria was fighting with Vienna, when Vienna was fighting with Turkey, the Turks were going to attack the town by tunneling underneath the town. Bakers work at night and they heard the Turks tunneling under the ground. They were able to alert the authorities and they could head off the attack. The bakers, in celebration of defeating the Turks, made crescent-shaped rolls because the Turkish flag has a crescent on it, and it is said that the Viennese said, "We eat you for breakfast, we eat these crescent-shaped rolls." I am now going to check on the head of dough that we mixed earlier, just to make sure it is properly fermenting. I am looking for this dough to get larger and poofier. You can tell it has risen, it is softer. It is not quite to the squaring out step yet because it is still a little too firm. I am looking for something that people have described as pillowy or like a kiddie bed. I always go by, if I could fall asleep in the dough, it's ready to work with. That is not. So I am going to do my second fold, which is a letter fold. It is essentially a single fold. Some people will put the single fold first, and some people will do the double fold first, like we have done. I have found that my layers stay together better by doing that fold, the double fold first. Most of the time it is a matter of what you were trained doing. So my dough has relaxed, it has stayed chilled, and now I want to roll it out to the thickness that I appreciate again. There is one thing to be careful about when rolling out your dough. You have a spine side of that book, and you have 3 sides of pages. Your spine side and the opening side are what is going to stretch. If I tried to roll against my spine, my dough would not stretch out. I want to make sure I am rolling with my spine to get the layers that I need. Again, I am starting in the middle and rolling up, rotating, and doing the same thing. I can tell the gluten is stronger, but I can also tell it has relaxed, and I do not want to let it sit any longer. Again, I am flipping the dough over simply to get evenness. I want to make sure that I am never sticking to the table. If I am sticking to the table, I will think I am rolling, but I will really just be rolling my top layer as the bottom layer sticks to the table. This again, I have to be very careful about rolling my edges to the same thickness as everything else. Remember, I don't want to go off of the dough, beveling it. I want to go to the end of the dough to make it even with everything else. You can tell my dough is going on a diet in the middle. And again, I want it even. As I pick it up, that middle goes back to where it should. I can see my dough trying to go back to its original length. That is the gluten that has developed. I have my dough at a very nice length, and I have my dough at a very nice thickness. This is exactly where I want my dough to be. I will now do a letter fold. It is exactly what it sounds like. You will be folding your dough as if you were folding a letter. I'm going to fold it up 2/3, and I'm going to fold the last 1/3 over it. I now have 3 sets of layers. When you are counting your layers, you will have layers of dough against dough. This will count as 1 layer. Whenever you have that dough against another folded part of the dough, it counts as 1 layer. So you will always have dough, butter, dough, but you will end up with more layers than you would just initially count. You have to subtract those places of double dough. I saw that my gluten had tightened up, and I am going to need to roll this out again so that I can shape it. Because my gluten tightened, I want to let it relax. I will put it back in the fridge. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we have been using to make croissants. They are mostly basic kitchen tools. We have our mixer. We can also always mix by hand if it is a small enough batch, simply because we are not looking for a very strong development. We have our bench knife for cutting the butter, training the butter, keeping our dough from sticking to the table. We also have table flour that will help keep the dough from sticking to the table. We have our rolling pin for helping to flatten our butter and for rolling out our dough. We have our thermometer that we tempt our dough with to make sure it was below 60 degrees. And we will be using egg wash and a ruler. We will have to have a place to put these, so we will have a sheet tray with parchment. I am going to make the egg wash now. All our egg wash is eggs beaten. You want to beat them until they run like water. There is no need to add salt, egg white, anything else. No need to add water. Don't make it more complicated than it needs to be. As a baker, you want to keep your ingredients to a minimum. There is very little space in bakeries. And you want to keep things as simple as possible. As you have seen, our process is a long one. So you need to have other things to do in those resting times. It is good if you have other simple tasks to keep you busy. Again, I just want it to run like water. This will ensure a nice, even coating over the croissant. I'm going to set this aside for a minute. It is all ready. It is part of my mise en place being the tools that I need to work with and the organization that I have with my tools. The more organized, the more set up, the more ready you are, the more mise en place you have, the easier your tasks will go. I am going to put down my flour. Grab my now relaxed dough. I need to roll this out to make it into the shapes. We will be showing you how to do regular croissants and pain au chocolat. It comes from the same dough, same simple process. As I talked about before, we wanted to roll out with the spine. That is what stretches. This is still true. You're going to look for your sides that have your fold, again the spine, and you are going to roll that out. Starting in the middle, rolling up. I can see my top layer is sliding a little bit, so I flip it over to roll the other side to ensure that both sides will be rolling evenly. If your dough ever is fighting you too much, you simply can let it sit a little bit longer. Again, I do not advise letting it sit for more than half an hour, as your butter may get too cold and seize up. My dough is actually fighting me more than I would like. I can let it sit for a couple of minutes. I'm not going to put it in the fridge at this point because it's just a couple minutes that I'm going to let it sit. We are looking for a thickness of our croissants to be about 1/4 of an inch. Any recipe you make, any amount that you make, you will still be looking for that 1/4 inch thickness. This is a good thickness that will ensure you get a good rise on your croissants. Again, croissants are a laminated dough in which it is layers upon layers. The thing that is special about croissants as opposed to the layers in puff pastry is that this is a yeasted product. We are depending on that yeast and that butter to help give us a large rise. Puff pastry stays flat. It can have thousands and thousands of layers. It can have as many folds as you want. Croissants typically have 25 to 55 layers. Again, we can't make these too heavy because the butter and the yeast will not be able to hold them. This is very, very important. This is also why when we will be shaping them, we will be careful not to be too heavy-handed. If you are too heavy-handed with your croissant dough, you will be smashing your layers together. This again will end up in a very short, stubby product. You can see my dough is fighting still, but it is fighting a lot less than it was even a minute ago. When you work with dough and you work with yeast, you need to keep in mind that yeast is a living thing and it is working in conjunction with the flour and enzymes, and that learning how to be a good baker is not only learning the techniques of what you are doing, but it is also about learning how to build a relationship with that dough. The dough is going to tell you what you want. The dough is going to tell you what it wants to do, and you are telling the dough what you want it to do. In the end, you guys have to learn to work together. My dough just a touch longer, and again you can see every time I touch it, it shrinks back. That is the gluten saying, I don't want to stretch anymore. Again, I mentioned resting your dough is good, but that is never something you want to do forever because again, it will build structure that way. I need to make sure that my ends aren't thicker than the rest of my dough, but I need to make sure that they are square as well. I have a nice thickness of dough, perhaps a little thicker than I would like, but I'm ultimately happy with it. I would now like to divide this dough into 2 equal strips so that half of it can be croissants and half of it can be pain au chocolat. The easiest way to divide this in half is not with the ruler, but letting the dough tell me what to do. I'm going to sprinkle just a little bit of flour on it. I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to make a crease. I will unfold that dough and cut right along that crease. This gives me 2 equal sections of dough. This will be pain au chocolat. I don't want it to warm up, so I'm going to put it back in the refrigerator. And I'm going to keep an eye on this dough. It can still rise a little bit more. These are going to be my croissants. I need to measure this out so that my bases are 4 inches long. In order to do that, I have a ruler. When I am doing this, I need to pretend that this is a croissant. This is a full croissant. I am going to line my ruler up with that edge and hit the 4. I am just going to make a tiny little mark in the dough. Then I'm going to move 4 inches, go to my 8. I'm going to move another 4 inches, going to my 12. And I am going to measure every 4 inches after that. I need this mark a little bit more. Again, I don't need a huge mark. This is just my guide of where I will be cutting to. Now, as I said, I need to pretend that this is a full croissant and that this is my 4-inch base. In order to do that, I need to line up this as if it were the middle of that croissant. Meaning, I am going to line this ruler up with the 2. This means this is the 4-inch base of that croissant. Again, I need to pretend that this is the halfway and line up the 2 with the beginning. I am then going to hit my 4 and every 4 after that. You should see that your marks are in the middle. I am then going to cut up. Remember, this is where my 1 was. That was the tip of this magical mystery croissant. And this is now the tip of that one. So I go up to my other mark. When I am cutting croissant dough, I want to be very, very definitive. I do not want to leave little bits hanging around. I do not want to leave any of my layers confused or hanging on to the other triangles. Now these are short and stubby. I am going to want my croissants to roll out longer and wider. In order to do that, I am going to make a 1/2-inch nick in the middle of each croissant. Again, I am cutting all the way through, but not too far into my triangle. This is where I need to start being careful about my lamination and me possibly sealing it. If I touch these edges, I will be sealing together the layers of lamination that you see on the side of croissants. If I seal those closed, I am simply not showing off all the work I have just done. I need to stretch these out. Like I said, I want these longer, but I don't want to touch my edges. I'm going to roll my fingers. I'm going to pull my fingers right along the middle of the croissant. It will tell me when it wants to stop stretching. I then have this nick, and I'm going to exaggerate it again. Then I will fold up a little bow tie. I just want these corners to fold in a little bit to help give me more length. I'm going to get it started with my fingertips and then roll down and out. I'm going to put this on the sheet tray, and I'm going to make sure that the tip is on the bottom. It is much easier to roll down and out and away from you and get even pressure. Again, I am going to make sure that the tip is on the bottom of that croissant, and I'm going to make sure that they are facing the same direction. As croissants proof, because of the yeast, the heavier side where there is more dough is going to end up leaning back. If you have your croissants improperly lined up, these two sides are going to lean back into each other. In order to prevent that from happening, we need to make sure that the tips and the skinny sides are facing all the same way. And I'm getting it started with my fingertips, rolling down and out. Don't be too heavy-handed with that down and out, or you will be crushing the layers. Again, the dough is going to tell you how far it wants to stretch. Lay it down, fold that to a little bow tie, roll down and out. Again, making sure that your croissants face the same way. The final fermentation, or the proofing of our dough, is where our yeast is going to work to produce gas to make the dough larger. It's going to create those gas bubbles. Your croissants are going to get bigger. If I do not give them even spacing, they will proof into each other, and they will also not bake properly if they do not have space for the airflow of the oven to pass through. Those are our shaped croissants. I now need to egg wash them. Again, our egg wash is just eggs till they run like water. You don't need anything fancy. Keep it simple. Keep your tasks lined up, your mise en place. Make everything as simple and easy as possible. We are going to be egg washing our croissants twice, once right after shaping. This is going to help us keep the dough from drying out. It's just a little protective layer. When we do the second egg wash, it will be shortly before baking, and it will be for shine and color. I want to be careful about these layers again. If you remember, we stretched right down the middle so that we did not seal our ends. Egg wash is a terrible sealant. It will seal anything. So to protect those layers, I want to start right at the top middle and paint down. I don't want a lot of egg wash. I just want these to be shiny. I don't want to taste this egg wash. Remember, I am just protecting the outside layer of skin. Again, I am starting at the top and rolling down, painting down. I am using that shoulder there to protect it. I don't need a ton of egg wash. I don't need to go over and paint these a million times. I don't need to be Picasso. I just need to make them shine. I am now going to set these aside, and I'm going to let them proof. Again, proofing is where the yeast is producing the CO2 gas bubbles and making our croissants expand. If you remember way back in the beginning, we mixed our dough. It is now fermented. I can tell because it is lighter, it is fluffier, it's bigger. This is where I need to square it off so that I will be able to lock in my butter. We started with the piece of dough, which is now those, as it had been squared out and frozen. This is the squaring out part. You can already see how much of that gluten has developed just by how our dough is springing back and how smooth it has gotten. If you remember, we talked about evenness of the thickness of the dough, and also we want to make sure we have nice square corners. Again, you're going from a circle to a rectangle. It will never be perfect, but the more you get it lined up now, the easier it will be later on. I'm pressing down on it to make sure that my dough is an even thickness. When I am happy with my dough, I'm going to make sure to scrape it up from the table. As we saw with the folding, every time you touch it, it's going to spring back a little. So after you have it wrapped in plastic, just double check to make sure it is what you want it to be. You could see how soft that dough was. That again is one of the reasons why we want to chill it down. If we tried to roll the butter in that, it would not work very well. So I have my dough that I placed in the fridge that I want to make pain au chocolat with. And I am just going to re-roll out the edges a little bit. Now we have lovely strips of chocolate that were produced by Chef Kier. These are just about the perfect length, and I'm very excited about this. I am going to put 2 layers of chocolate into my pain au chocolat because I love chocolate and it's traditional. I am going to lay my chocolate down about 1/3 of the way, and I am going to fold over this. I am going to press down a little so that I can seal it. I'm also making a seam where I will put my 2nd layer of chocolate. I am putting it right on that seam. I am now going to fold the whole thing over. It is very important that you fold the entire thing over because I want this seam directly on the bottom in the middle. As we talked about with the croissants, that the tip will pop up. If you do not have that seam right on the bottom in the middle, these will also pop up. I want these to be, again, about 4 inches. I can line up my ruler and simply cut through. We aren't so worried about being heavy-handed with these because the main attraction is the chocolate. Some places like to have the chocolate actually hanging out of the edges of the croissant, and some places like to have it more tucked in like this. Again, these are going to get bigger. I want to give them enough space. If I want to make sure that my seam is not going to pop up, I can get down on its level and check to make sure that seam is there. Again, these are going to get the 2 egg washes. This one is simply to protect it. I am just going to make a couple of shiny swipes right across the top. I don't want to see any drips. I don't want to see it be bright yellow. That means it's going to taste eggy. It also means it's going to get very, very dark in the oven. So our croissants have been proofing. If you have them in room temperature, they can take half an hour to an hour, maybe to an hour and a half. What you are looking for a good proofed croissant is something that is light and fluffy. It'll be larger than what it was before, and light and fluffy is a relative term. You're going to be able to feel an airiness. It is not going to feel as dense when you rolled it. When you check croissants for a proper proof, you always want to feel the edges and the top as well. These little edges proof faster, so you can't tell just by touching them. These, I can feel that they have that openness in the middle. Again, if you are very heavy-handed, they never will proof properly. I'm going to egg wash them a second time before they go in the oven. This is for a proper shine and a proper color. You want your croissants to be a nice golden brown. You also want them to be golden all the way to the sheet tray. Many croissants baked here, they have very, very white bottom edges and they start to collapse there. That is because they are not baked enough. Again, for the egg wash, I want to preserve the layers, so I have very little egg wash on my brush. I'm going to start at the top and swipe down. Again, I am just making it shiny. A lot of people want to create more work for themselves and they want to paint everywhere. It is not necessary. You just need to do the swipe and swipe. Again, I don't want to see drips. When it bakes, those drips will be exaggerated and they will start to taste eggy. The PÂTE Chocolat gets the same treatment. It shouldn't feel dense anymore. Again, dense being relative. You should be able to feel an inner lightness. Again, handle these gently because they are full of air now. Again, I am just going to do the light swipe. These are going to be baked in a regular oven. I do not suggest convection simply because they are light and airy and the fans in the convection oven can blow them over. We were very, very careful to make sure that they were all leaning the same way. The fan can blow them the other direction or actually all the way over into the next croissant. So these will be baked in a regular oven, temperature 350. We bake them for approximately 16 minutes. You want to do 8 minutes, rotate, and then 8 minutes more. Again, the ultimate sign that they are done is they will have a nice gradation of color all the way to the bottom. And so here we have our final product. You can see that these have a gorgeous color all the way down to the bottom, and you can see your laminated layers. We did a very good job of not egg washing them closed, so you can see individual lines of dough. Here we have our PÂTE Chocolat. Again, we were less concerned with the layers, but you still can see some, and they are also all the way baked down. We do have a couple that kissed, and this is what happens when there is not enough airflow in the oven. Other than that, they look beautiful.
Those look wonderful. I'm the luckiest one here.
Notice the flakes.
Mm.
Thank you, Chef.
Thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed. Let us know if you have any question. Don't hesitate. We'll respond. Have to go now. We have to go because we want to eat all those. Don't forget to like us and subscribe. Thank you, Chef.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.